They didn't invite Earth. That was the first insult. The second was silence. For over 2 centuries, humanity had clawed its way from a fragile, divided species into something far more dangerous, unified not by peace, but by pressure. Every signal sent beyond the solar system had been carefully crafted. Greetings, mathematics, music, even art. A hopeful hand extended into the dark. Nothing ever reached back. At least, not officially. Deep beneath the Martian crust, in a facility that did not exist on any map, Commander Elias Varn stood before a wall of stars, each one tagged, catalogued, observed. Humanity had not been ignored. It had been watched. They've catalogued us as developing Tier 3, said Dr. Lena Cade, her voice sharp with disbelief. Non-threatening. Contained. Elias didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on a rotating hologram. A cluster of alien species arranged like a council chamber, each one represented by symbols humanity barely understood. At the center floated a sigil, the mark of the Galactic Council. They've known about us for decades, Elias finally said. Maybe longer. And they chose not to respond. No, he corrected, they chose not to acknowledge us. That distinction hung heavy in the air. Humanity wasn't alone. It never had been. But in the vast political machine of the galaxy, Earth was a footnote. A primitive world, not yet worth the effort. Lena crossed her arms. So what now? We keep sending messages, hoping they suddenly care. Elias turned to her, something colder settling behind his eyes. No, we stop asking. The room fell quiet. Outside, Mars' red horizon stretched endlessly, a reminder of how far humanity had come. Colonies on Europa, Titan, even the asteroid belts. Terraforming projects underway. A species no longer confined, and yet still dismissed. They have rules, Elias continued, gesturing to the council hologram. Hierarchy, influence, power blocks. They respect one thing. Lena already knew the answer. Force. Not just force, he said. Demonstration. A shift occurred in the room, not in the systems, not in the data, but in the people, the scientists, the strategists, the watchers. For years, their mission had been observation. Patience. Restraint. Now, something else was taking shape. Lena stepped closer to the hologram, zooming in on a section of space near the outer edges of known territory. There's a border dispute here. 2 council species. It's been escalating. Elias nodded. Exactly. Her eyes widened slightly. You're not suggesting we. We intervene, he said calmly. On our terms. That's insane, she whispered. We'd be exposing ourselves to the entire galaxy. Elias allowed himself a faint smile. That's the point. For the first time in generations, humanity wasn't reaching out with a question. It was preparing to make a statement. And somewhere beyond the edge of mapped space, the Galactic Council continued its endless deliberations, unaware that the species it had ignored was about to step onto the stage. Not as a guest, but as a force they could no longer overlook. The war wasn't supposed to matter. To the Galactic Council, it was just another border conflict, one of dozens simmering across their mapped territories. 2 minor species, the Thaurin Collective and the Vakar Dominion, had been contesting a strip of resource-rich space for nearly a decade. Skirmishes, trade disruptions, the occasional destroyed fleet, routine. Contained. Insignificant. Perfect. That's where we go, Elias said, standing before a tactical projection of the disputed zone. The star systems flickered in soft blue, while conflict hotspots pulsed red like open wounds. Lena paced slowly, her brow furrowed. You're choosing a live battlefield as our first contact? That's not a demonstration. That's a declaration of war. Not if we control the narrative, Elias replied. We don't pick a side. We end the conflict. She stopped. End it? These species have been fighting for years. The council hasn't even resolved it. Elias met her gaze. Exactly. Around them, the command chamber buzzed with quiet urgency. Engineers recalibrated deep space drives. Weapons specialists reviewed systems that had never been used beyond simulation. For decades, humanity had built in secret, not for conquest, but for contingency. Just in case the silence ever broke, or needed to be broken, we deploy a single fleet, Elias continued. Minimal, precise. Enough to overwhelm both sides without total destruction. Lena shook her head. You're underestimating them. We've studied their tech, but we've never faced it. Not directly. And they've never seen ours, he countered. That was the truth no one could ignore. Humanity's greatest advantage wasn't size or resources, it was unpredictability. While the Council species evolved within established systems, doctrines, and rules, Earth had developed in isolation. No external influence. No shared standards. No expectations. Lena exhaled slowly. If this goes wrong... It won't, Elias said. Though his voice carried the weight of knowing it could, he turned back to the projection and expanded the view. A human fleet appeared, sleek, angular ships unlike anything in Council records. At their center, the Aegis Prime, humanity's most advanced command vessel. We enter at the height of their engagement, he said. Disable both fleets. No unnecessary casualties. Then we broadcast. Lena raised an eyebrow. Broadcast what? Elias paused for a moment, as if choosing words that would echo far beyond this room. Recognition. The chamber fell silent again. Not a threat. Not a plea. A demand. Across millions of kilometers, in a region of space both chaotic and forgotten, two alien powers prepared for another violent clash, unaware that a third force was already en route. A force that didn't belong to the Council, didn't follow its rules, and had no intention of asking permission. As the fleet's departure countdown began, Lena glanced once more at the holographic stars. You realize, she said quietly, once we do this, there's no going back to being ignored. Elias nodded. That's the idea. Somewhere in the vast dark between systems, engines ignited, silent, powerful, unseen. Humanity was no longer waiting for its turn. It was taking it. The battle was already in motion when humanity arrived. Streams of energy tore through the vacuum like jagged lightning, illuminating fractured hulls and drifting debris. The Thauran Collective's bioorganic vessels pulsed with a sickly green glow, their living armor writhing as it absorbed incoming fire. Opposite them, the Vakar Dominion's warships moved with cold precision, angular, metallic constructs unleashing coordinated volleys that carved through space with surgical intent. It was chaos. It was predictable. And it was exactly where humanity wanted to be. Fleet, hold position at the perimeter, Elias ordered, his voice steady aboard the Aegis Prime. The command deck was dim, lit only by tactical displays and the cold shimmer of distant explosions. Do not engage until my mark. Around him, officers moved with quiet efficiency. Every system was primed, every calculation accounted for. This moment, this single impossible moment, had been rehearsed 1,000 times. Both factions are escalating, Lena reported from her station. They're deploying heavier assets. If we wait too long, we won't, Elias said. On the main display, the battle intensified. A Thauran cruiser burst apart under concentrated fire, its organic structure unraveling into drifting tendrils. In response, a swarm of smaller bioships surged forward, overwhelming a Vakar flank with sheer numbers. Neither side noticed the new arrivals. Not yet. Signal interference? Elias asked. Minimal, Lena replied. Their focus is entirely on each other. Good. Elias stepped forward, eyes fixed on the shifting lines of combat. This was the moment humanity had chosen, not at the beginning of the fight, not at the end, but at its peak, when both sides were committed, when neither could easily withdraw, when intervention would be undeniable. Mark, the word cut through the silence, and everything changed. Human ships surged forward in perfect formation, engines flaring with a light unlike anything in the battlefield. No warning shots, no hesitation, precision. The first wave didn't destroy. It disarmed. Focused energy bursts struck Vakar weapon arrays, overloading them in an instant. Thauran bioships convulsed as targeted pulses disrupted their neural command structures, leaving them drifting but intact. Confusion rippled across the battlefield. What are they doing? Lena whispered, watching as entire squadrons went dark without a single explosion. Ending it, Elias replied. A second wave followed, faster, sharper. Human vessels weaved through the chaos, deploying localized fields that severed communication links between ships. Fleets that had fought as unified entities suddenly found themselves isolated, blind. For the first time in years, the battle stalled. Then it stopped. No final strike. No decisive victory. Just silence. Across the void, thousands of alien ships hung suspended in a forced ceasefire, their systems crippled, but their crews alive. And at the center of it all, the Aegis Prime moved forward. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Broadcast ready, Lena said, her voice barely steady. Elias nodded once. Sent it. A single signal erupted outward, cutting through every frequency, every channel, every barrier. Not just to the fleets before them, but far beyond. Into Council space. Into every system that had ever chosen to ignore them. For the first time, humanity wasn't whispering into the void. It was speaking loud enough for the entire galaxy to hear. And this time, there would be no silence in return. The signal did not travel like a typical broadcast. It didn't scatter, weaken, or degrade across distance. It cut through encrypted military channels, through civilian networks, through frequencies reserved for Council-only communication. It bypassed protocols that had stood unchallenged for millennia, as if those safeguards had never existed at all. Across the galaxy, conversations stopped. In orbiting stations, deep core cities, and drifting armadas, systems flickered as something new forced its way in, not as noise, but as clarity. A single image formed, the Aegis Prime, suspended between two silent fleets. And then a voice. Unidentified council entities. Elias began, his tone measured, unwavering. You have observed our species for generations. You have classified us, contained us, ignored us. There was no anger in his words, only certainty. We are humanity of soul. In the Thaurin and Vakar fleets, confusion turned to something deeper, unease. Their ships, once locked in deadly conflict, now hung powerless under the quiet dominance of a force neither recognized. Elias continued, "This conflict is over." As if to reinforce the statement, a subtle wave pulsed outward from the human fleet. Disabled systems stabilized, not restored to combat readiness, but prevented from collapse. Life support normalized. Critical damage halted. It wasn't mercy. It was control. You will withdraw, Elias said, addressing both sides. Not by negotiation. Not by council decree. By necessity. On distant worlds, within the hidden chambers of the Galactic Council, reactions erupted. They breached central frequencies, impossible. Identify the species. Humanity? That designation was Tier 3, non-threatening. The word echoed with sudden absurdity. Back in the contested system, Lena monitored the response feeds flooding in from across the network. They're scrambling, she said quietly. Council channels are lighting up. Emergency assemblies. They didn't expect this. Elias allowed a brief pause before delivering the final part of the message. You chose not to acknowledge us. A faint shift in his tone, still calm, but edged now with something unyielding. So, we have made ourselves known. The transmission widened. Star systems beyond the immediate conflict began receiving the same signal. Trade hubs, military outposts, even the inner territories of dominant council species. There was nowhere left untouched. We do not seek conflict, Elias said, but we will not remain unseen. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Then, something unprecedented occurred. From within the Vakar fleet, a single vessel powered down its remaining systems completely, a gesture of surrender. Moments later, Thaurin ships followed, their organic forms dimming into a state of passive compliance. Not out of trust, out of realization. They were no longer the strongest forces in this space. And they knew it. Lena exhaled slowly. They're standing down. Elias nodded. eyes still fixed forward. Good. But his focus wasn't on the fleets before them anymore. It was on what came next. Because far beyond this quieted battlefield, the true audience of this message, the Galactic Council, was no longer ignoring humanity. It was watching. And for the first time, it was listening. They had no protocol for this. Inside the central chamber of the Galactic Council, a structure older than most civilizations present within it, silence had become something unnatural, strained, fragile, on the verge of fracture. Dozens of species filled the chamber, each represented in forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some existed as shimmering energy fields, others as towering biological entities, and a few as intricate mechanical constructs housing ancient intelligences. All of them were focused on the same projection. The human fleet paused, dominant, uninvited. They penetrated secured channels without traceable intrusion. One voice resonated, layered and harmonic. Our systems did not detect entry. They simply allowed it. That is not possible. Another replied sharply, its form flickering with agitation. Council encryption has remained unbroken for as long as we have assumed ourselves unchallenged. A third voice interrupted. At the center of the chamber, the High Arbiter remained silent, a being known only by title, its true form obscured within a shifting field of light and shadow. It had presided over conflicts, treaties, and collapses across centuries. Nothing surprised it anymore. Until now, humanity, the Arbiter finally spoke, the single word echoing across the chamber. Classification. A smaller projection shifted forward, pulling from archived data. Sparse. Outdated. Origin. Sol system. Developmental trajectory. Rapid. Last evaluation. 2 centuries prior. Status. Tier 3. Non-threatening. Contained within local expansion. A pause. Then, almost reluctantly, reassessment required. The chamber erupted. They intervened in a sovereign conflict. They disabled 2 fleets without destruction, precision beyond standard warfare models. They issued demands without recognition of council authority. Each statement layered over the next, urgency rising into something close to panic. The Arbiter raised a single appendage, whatever form it took, and the noise ceased instantly. They demonstrated capability, it said, not intent. That distinction is irrelevant, one delegate snapped. Power without oversight is a threat. And yet another countered, they ended a conflict we allowed to persist. That point lingered. For years, the Council had monitored the Thaurin-Vakar dispute, choosing not to intervene directly. Balance, after all, was often maintained through controlled instability. Humanity had disrupted that balance. Not recklessly, efficiently. They did not claim territory, the Arbiter observed. They did not pursue retreating forces. They broadcast recognition. A curious choice of word. Recognition was not something granted lightly within the Council. It was earned through generations of interaction, diplomacy, and compliance. Humanity had bypassed all of it. They are forcing acknowledgement, a delegate said quietly. Yes, the Arbiter replied, and they have ensured it cannot be ignored. Across the chamber, data streams continued to update in real time. Reports from outlying systems, analysis of human technology, projections of potential escalation. None of it offered comfort. What is our response? Another voice asked. For the first time, uncertainty touched the edges of the chamber. Not fear, not yet, but something close. The Arbiter turned its attention back to the projection of the Aegis Prime, still positioned at the heart of the Silence battlefield. Prepare, a formal summons, it said at last. A ripple of surprise moved through the assembly. A summons, one delegate repeated. To them, the Arbiter did not hesitate. We will hear what humanity has to say, because ignoring them was no longer an option. And confronting them without understanding, that would be a mistake the Council could not afford to make. The summons arrived without ceremony. No grand projection. No overwhelming display of authority. Just a signal, precise, encoded, undeniable. Even so, Every system aboard Aegis Prime recognized its origin instantly. The Council, Lena said, quietly, watching the transmission unfold across her console. They're requesting no, demanding our presence. Elias stood still, hands clasped behind his back as the message resolved into a single directive. Attend. No location. No time. Just expectation. They still think this is on their terms, one of the officers muttered. Elias allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Of course they do. Lena glanced at him. And is it? For a moment, he didn't answer. Beyond the reinforced viewport, the battlefield remained frozen in uneasy peace. Thaurin and Vakar vessels drifted in silence, their crews undoubtedly scrambling to understand what had just happened and what it meant. Everything had changed, and yet this was only the beginning. They're not summoning us to negotiate, Lena continued. They want to assess us, measure us, decide where we fit. Elias turned, his expression sharpening. We don't fit. That was the problem. The Council operated on hierarchy, tiers, classifications, controlled integration. Every species had its place, its limits, its expected path. Humanity had skipped the process entirely. We go, Elias said. A ripple of tension passed through the command deck. Lena frowned. Just like that, we walk into the center of their power structure, surrounded by species we've just embarrassed in open space. We don't walk, Elias corrected. We arrive. There was a difference. He moved toward the central console, activating a new projection, one not drawn from Council data, but from humanity's own hidden archives. A map far more detailed than anything the Council had on record. Trade routes, military corridors, energy relays, and at its heart, the Council's core system. Lena's eyes widened. We mapped this. Over decades, Elias replied. Observation works both ways. The implication settled heavily. While the Council had been watching humanity as a distant curiosity, humanity had been studying them as a potential reality, preparing. If we go there, Lena said slowly, we're not just responding to their summons. We're proving we can reach them whenever we choose. Elias nodded once. Exactly. Around them, the crew began to understand. This wasn't diplomacy as the Council knew it. This wasn't a species asking for entry. This was a species redefining the terms of existence within the galaxy. What do we say when we get there? Lena asked. Elias looked back at the frozen battlefield one last time. 2 fleets, 2 powers, silenced without annihilation. A message written in restraint and strength. We tell them the truth, he said. And what's that? His gaze hardened, not with anger, but with something far more unyielding. That we're not here to join their system. A pause. We're here to change it. Across the void, engines began to charge, not for battle, but for something far more dangerous. Presence. The Aegis Prime shifted, its fleet aligning in perfect synchronization as coordinates were locked, not from the summons, but from humanity's own understanding. Somewhere deep within Council space, ancient systems continued their endless cycles, unaware that something unprecedented was already on its way. Not invited, not guided, but arriving all the same. And this time, the Council would not be watching from a distance. They arrived without crossing the distance. That was the first realization. One moment, the core system of the Galactic Council remained as it had for millennia, layered with orbital defenses, surveillance grids, and fleets positioned in quiet vigilance. The next, humanity was there. No warning, no detectable entry vector, no distortion of space that Council instruments could interpret. The Aegis Prime and its escort fleet simply existed within the perimeter, perfectly still, perfectly placed. For the first time in its recorded history, the Council's core system was breached. Inside the central chamber, alarms cascaded across every interface. Unidentified fleet inside defensive radius. No transit signature, no gate usage. They've bypassed the outer rings entirely. The chamber erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in disbelief, in outrage, some in something dangerously close to fear. At the center, The High Arbiter did not move. Stabilize the chamber, it commanded, and slowly, reluctantly, order returned. A new projection formed above the assembly, the human fleet, closer than any foreign force had ever been allowed. They have accepted the summons. A delegate said, its tone tight, without compliance to protocol. They have done more than accept, another replied. They have redefined it. The Arbiter observed in silence for a long moment. Then, open a channel. Across the void, aboard the Aegis Prime, the incoming request appeared. Lena exhaled softly. They're ready. Elias didn't respond immediately. He stepped forward, the weight of everything that had led to this moment settling into something calm, something precise. On screen, he said, the chamber of the Galactic Council unfolded before them. Vast, ancient, filled with species that had once seemed unreachable. Now, they were simply present. Humanity of soul, the Arbiter began, its voice carrying across the link, resonant and controlled. You have been observed. You have demonstrated capability beyond your classification. A pause. You stand before the Galactic Council. Elias met its gaze without hesitation. And you stand before us. The words landed like a fracture. Subtle, irreversible. A ripple passed through the chamber, shock, offense, disbelief, but the Arbiter raised its appendage once more, silencing the reaction. You have forced acknowledgement, it said. This is unprecedented. Elias inclined his head slightly. Then we're already making progress. Another pause. Measured now. Careful. What is it you seek? The Arbiter asked. Recognition. Power. Territory. Influence. Those were the expected answers. They always were. Elias didn't give any of them. We seek nothing, he said. Confusion flickered across multiple delegates. Then why come? One demanded. Elias stepped closer to the projection, his voice steady, unshaken. Because you made a mistake. The chamber stilled. You built a system that decides which species matter, he continued. Which ones are ready? Which ones are worth hearing? His eyes moved across the assembly, not in defiance, but in clarity. And you decided we weren't. No one interrupted him now. You were wrong. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Silence followed. Not the dismissive silence humanity had known for centuries, but something entirely different. Consideration. Uncertainty. For the first time, the balance of the chamber had shifted, not through force, but through presence alone. The Arbiter regarded him, its form shifting subtly, as if recalibrating something far deeper than data. You arrive uninvited, it said slowly. You disrupt established order. You claim no desire to join, yet you stand at its center. A beat. Define your position, humanity of soul. Elias didn't hesitate. We don't want a seat in your council. A stir moved through the chamber. Then what do you want? The Arbiter asked. Elias's answer came without pause. A voice that isn't granted. A faint tension rippled outward. And if it is denied, a delegate pressed. For the first time, something sharper entered Elias's expression. Not anger, not aggression, but certainty forged over centuries of being overlooked. Then we'll keep speaking, he said. A quiet breath. Until you have no choice but to listen. The chamber fell into a deeper silence than before. Not dismissal. Not control. Something new. Because this was no longer about whether humanity would be acknowledged. That had already happened. This was about what came next. The Arbiter leaned forward, just slightly, but enough to signal something no one in the chamber had ever seen from it before. Consideration without superiority. You have altered the balance, it said. Elias met its gaze. That was the point. Far beyond the chamber, fleets remained still, systems watched, and countless civilizations waited, aware now of a new presence in the galaxy. Not rising, not emerging, but already here. The Council had not invited humanity. It had not prepared for them, and it had certainly not offered them a place. But as the chamber sat in quiet, shifting thought, one truth had already taken hold. Humanity didn't need a seat. It had become something far more difficult to ignore. A constant, a force, a voice. And this time, The galaxy was finally listening.